Good evening, everyone, and I want to welcome you all. My name is Ellen Myers, and I'm the Programs and Communications Director for the Newton Free Library. I'm so glad that you all tuned into this session on the invasive insect known as the spotted lanternfly. I would like to thank our program co-sponsors, Green Newton, Newton Conservators, and the Newton Tree Conservancy. It has been a time of transition for all of us, and I hope that you have been able to find creative and meaningful ways to thrive in the challenging circumstances in which we all find ourselves. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Joshua Bruckner. He is the Asian Longhorn Beetle Outreach Coordinator, Crop and Pest Services with the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. Thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So as Ellen said, my name is Joshua Bruckner. I am with the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. So this evening's session is going to be about the insect that you see on your screen right here, the spotted lanternfly. So we're going to learn a bit about its biology, its life cycle, how it got here to the United States, and kind of the threats it poses to the US and to the state of Massachusetts. So to begin, what is the spotted lanternfly? What is this curious looking insect that you're seeing here? So on the top there is its Latin name, Lycorma delicatula. It is in the order Hempiptera, which means it is a true bug, so it's related to things like aphids and stink bugs. The true bugs have this kind of shield-shaped body and a long sucking proboscis that they use to pierce plants and suck the sap out of them. That's kind of what distinguishes them from other insects. So given that, it is a sap-sucking insect. It is invasive and it targets tree of heaven as its primary host, but it has a lot of other host plants, including things like black walnut, grapes and apples, a whole lot of things. And as you'll see shortly, its very wide range of hosts makes it a big problem. It's originally from Asia, so as a lot of the invasive insects we have in the United States are. So these are some different photographs of the spotted lanternfly. It's about 1/2 to 1 inch long. It has this very distinct coloration, as you can see in the bottom left photo. It's got these bright red hind wings. It's got spots on its wings. It's kind of dullish or gray colored forewings. And it looks pretty distinct, especially when its wings are spread like this. But when it's at rest, as it is in these photos, it doesn't have quite that same bright, visible coloration. You can kind of see the red hind wings through the forewings, but they're not as distinct. It kind of actually has pretty decent camouflage that way. And the females, when they're gravid, especially get these very noticeable yellow bands on their abdomen. And some people have said it looks kind of like a butterfly or a moth, but you'll notice that it lacks the antenna that a butterfly or a moth would normally have. So some more photos of what it looks like, so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like against the bark of a tree. Even with its wings folded like that, it actually has pretty decent camouflage. You can see in those photos. And you would kind of note that it has a tendency to gather in large numbers, and you'll certainly see more of that very shortly. This is from the Virginia Cooperative Extension from Virginia Tech, just showing some other insects, at least in Virginia, that look somewhat like spotted lanternfly. You notice a lot of different kinds of moths, some things that we have in Massachusetts, such as the leopard moth. They all have kind of a similar shape, similar pattern to their wings, but the spotted lanternfly with that coloration is fairly distinct. Excuse me. So where do they come from? So this map right here shows the native range of the spotted lanternfly in red, and then pink shows the parts of the world where it's been introduced or invaded. So its native range is in parts of China. As you can see, it's been introduced to other parts of Asia, including Japan, Vietnam, and South Korea. And then you'll see all the way over the United States. It's in a couple of states over here. It's spread primarily through movement of egg masses. You can see kind of the different parts of the world where it's most present. So how did it get from its native range in East Asia to the United States? So it was first discovered in Berks County, Pennsylvania in 2014, and estimates put it having arrived around 2012. It most likely arrived via a shipment of stone to some sort of garden center in Pennsylvania. Eggs were probably laid on the stone that got shipped in. And since then, since 2014, it has spread to 26 different counties in Pennsylvania, and it's had a huge economic and social impact just in these last 6 years. And it has, despite quarantines and efforts to contain the spread of the spotted lanternfly, it has spread to several nearby states. This kind of shows you the concentration where the spotted lanternfly is in Pennsylvania. The red dots show positive tests. It's very, very heavily concentrated around the Philadelphia area where it was first found. And the green dots show negative tests. And this map's a bit out of date. And as you'll see right here, that's relevant because this map updated in March of this year shows how far the quarantine has spread. So all the colored counties are where the quarantine in Pennsylvania. As I said, it's 26 different counties. The orange ones were the ones that were up before March 3rd, 2020. And then the blue ones were added recently. So there's a less heavy concentration of spotted lanternfly in those blue colored counties. In fact, spotted lanternfly has only been identified in those more darkly shaded in towns. But since quarantine is established at the county level in Pennsylvania, the entire counties have been quarantined. So definitely much more heavily concentrated in around Philadelphia in the orange shaded places and less heavily concentrated in the blue ones, but it does show you how much the spotted lanternfly has spread since 2014 when it was first discovered. So this thing can spread pretty quickly, and as you'll see later on, it's very good at moving on its own. So as I said, spotted lanternfly is a sap-sucking insect, and that's how it primarily damages trees. It sucks the sap from different kinds of plants and trees, and they produce a waste called honeydew, which is a very sticky, sweet substance. The spotted lanternfly can't use up all the sugars and the energy that's in that sap that they're ingesting, so they excrete a lot of it in the honeydew. So you've got this sticky, sweet substance flowing down the trees and coming out of the holes in the tree that they're piercing. That's going to promote the growth of what's called sooty mold, this like very gross mold that's going to lead to death of a lot of plants. They create these kind of zones of dead leaves and other plants right around and underneath the tree where all that honeydew is falling. So that's eventually going to the mold, and the holes in the tree are going to lead to tree death, and all that sap is going to attract other insects such as hornets and wasps. Bees and ants are going to feed on it. So even though the spotted lanternfly is not going to directly kill the tree, they're going to severely weaken it and lead to some severe damage to the tree. So you see some pictures here. You can kind of see the blackened stuff on the ground. That is the result of the sooty mold from all that honeydew. You can see it growing on the tree, and the lanternflies crawling all over that tree. So it's the kind of thing that you get. This is another picture of the sooty mold and the honeydew all over a grape leaf. And this is important because they do love to go after grape vines and grape plants, and something like this is going to render the plant unsellable and maybe even eventually kill it with a very heavy infestation. So beyond that impact on trees and plants and on agricultural products, this is going to have an impact on just people's day-to-day lives. This is someone's back porch in Pennsylvania, and that's not water all over the steps, that's honeydew. So they probably have a tree full of spotted lanternfly right over that porch, and their waste product is just raining down onto that porch, and that's going to get everywhere. It's not just going to be on someone's porch. It could be all over someone's car or lawn furniture, their deck, the roof on the side of their house. It's indiscriminate, and this causes a pretty big impact on people's quality of life because you don't want this sort of thing, all over your property that you have to wash off. And again, to give you an idea of how bad the swarming is, the spotted lanternfly doesn't just a few at a time. It completely covers trees. This is probably a silver maple in someone's backyard. You can see it's totally covered in them. You can see again the black ring around the base of the tree. That's from all that sooty mold growing. And to really drive home the point of how kind of overwhelming and gross these things can be when they swarm. You can look at this video. So that should give you an idea of what the people in Pennsylvania are dealing with and what we're trying to prevent in Massachusetts with our awareness efforts. So I did mention that spotted lanternfly goes after tree of heaven and a couple other plants, and that it has a very extensive host list. So tree of heaven is its primary host, and some research shows that it needs it for part of its life cycle. Some other very common hosts include apple trees, plum, peach, cherry, and apricot trees, things in the prunus family, grapes, maples, black walnut, and you can see a lot of agricultural products there, which is why it's very concerning. But the list goes on, includes some very, very common trees like birch, beech, aspen, willows, elms, pears, things like hops and blueberries. Rose is another very common host plant, especially for very on in the insect's life cycle. So it's a total of about 70 different host plants. A lot of them very common, either as ornamentals, as street trees, city trees, things in our forest, things that our farmers are growing. It could be very devastating if established here in Massachusetts. So let me talk a little bit about its primary host, the tree of heaven, which you might know by its Latin name, Ailanthus altisma, or just Ailanthus. It's another non-native species that was introduced to the U.S. in 1784 because at the time it was considered a very exotic and wonderful species. It could grow pretty much anywhere. It had this very strange look to it, and a lot of native trees in burgeoning cities and urban centers were cut down and replaced with tree of heaven. Now it's considered a huge pest because it's very hard to get rid of because it can grow via suckering, just sprouting out of the roots. It creates a toxin that inhibits the growth of native plants, so it can outcompete them. It grows very readily in disturbed areas such as parking lots, sides of roads and railroad tracks, just anywhere. And people will be pretty familiar with this. And it has a pretty nasty smell to it, which I think a lot of people might be familiar with, kind of like a rancid peanut butter. It's often described as. This is what it looks like, and you might see them in your city, especially if you live in a kind of a more urban area. Like I said, you can definitely see them along train tracks or the highway or in parking lots. Pretty distinct looking, and it has a couple different features that you can use to pick it out regardless of time of year. The bark kind of is this gray mottled color, like the skin of a cantaloupe. It's got these pretty thick knobbly twigs with a kind of a U-shaped leaf scar, long compound leaves that are kind of like feather or fan shaped. Each leaflet has a little bump at the base of it. And it has what are called samaras, that's the seed or the fruit, kind of like the seeds of an ash tree. And those will hold on even after the tree's lost its leaves. These kind of like orange, brownish, papery looking samaras that are hanging off the tree throughout the. So that's a close-up of the bark. So this is, I think, one of, besides the leaves and the samaras, the seeds, this is one of the easiest ways to pick them apart. It's a pretty distinct-looking bark pattern. So as I said, there's a lot of different fruit and agricultural products that spotted lanternfly goes after. So different industries that have already been impacted by them in Pennsylvania, different fruit growers like apples, grapes, cherries, and peaches. So if it got established in Massachusetts, that would definitely affect vineyards, our robust, pick your own apple orchards. That would have an impact on the alcohol industry, production of wine, beer, and cider. It's had an impact on like the logging and hardwood industry in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of trees on that list of host trees that are used as common lumber trees. That have an impact on nursery and garden centers, like things like common plants that would sold at garden centers like roses or bushes. Transportation of materials to those garden centers and away from them is just a good vector for the insect to travel, to move around on. And a study done in Pennsylvania estimated that spotted lanternflies cause $42.6 million worth of damage per year to the different industries in Pennsylvania. That paper can be read online. It's called The Potential Economic Impact of the Spotted Lanternfly on Agriculture and Forestry in Pennsylvania by Jason K. Harper. It's a bit of a mouthful, but you can look up something like economic study of spotted lanternfly in Pennsylvania, and you might be able to find a summary. It's a bit dense, but it'll give you a good idea of kind of what it's done in that state. So these are just some pictures of the spotted lanternfly swarming different agricultural products. You'll notice it's not going after the fruit. There are some invasive insects like the brown marmorated stink bug that will target the fruit itself. The risk with spotted lanternfly is one, it's going to attack the plant itself, and if it's a very bad infestation, it's going to completely destroy and kill those, like the grapevines, and a lot of vineyards in Pennsylvania have lost huge amounts of their plants just from spotted lanternfly damage. But also, if that honeydew and sooty mold is all over the fruit, it's going to render it just got this, this mold that's all over the fruit, and it's not really going to be very appealing, and you're not going to be able to sell that in markets. This right here is a look at the life cycle of the spotted lanternfly, and you'll notice that unlike some insects that you might be familiar with, like the Asian longhorn beetle or the emerald ash borer, which are other invasive insects that we have established in Massachusetts, this insect has what's called incomplete metamorphosis. So it does not have a pupal stage, something like a butterfly or moth would have, where they go into a cocoon or a chrysalis. They go through what's called incomplete metamorphosis, where after the eggs hatch, they start off as a nymph, which is like a very small miniature version of the adult. And this goes through several instars or stages, getting larger and larger. The fourth instar goes from being black with white spots to sort of this very bright red color with some spots on it. And those eggs will hatch in like May or June, so like around this time of year. The nymphs go through different instars. They'll develop fully into adults around July or September. And then the adults try and find a breeding pair, and they mate. The females lay like 1 or 2 clutches of eggs before they're killed off by the first hard frost. So they get 1 generation per year, and those egg masses will survive over winter until it gets warm enough for them to hatch. So here's some close-up shots of what the nymphs look like. On the top left, you'll see what one of the earlier instars is like. Again, it's they're very, very small when they first hatch. They're black. They got those white spots. You can kind of see they have a similar shape to what the adult looks like, but they don't have the wings. The fourth instar, again, is that bright red color, which you can see here again on the branch of what's probably a tree of heaven. And here's what they look like, again, when they're young and they're swarming. And again, small plants like roses are kind of a good early indicator of the presence of spotted lanternfly, since when the nymphs are young, they obviously have a much smaller proboscis that can't puncture as large or thick of a plant. So they're either going to go after smaller succulent plants like roses, or they're going to be climbing higher and higher to the top of a tree. If the eggs have been laid on the side of a tree, they'll crawl up the trunk to the leaves or to the thin twigs higher up, where it's easier for their proboscis to pierce through and suck the sap. And then as adults, they can go right through the bark and have a much wider range of plants that they can damage. Here's a nice pinning that was done for us where you can see the life cycle of the spotted lanternfly, the first through fourth instar, and then the adult, and kind of get a sense of the size and scale. That adult, like I said, is only going to be about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch long, so it gives you an idea of how small the different nymphs can be. So this right here shows you what the egg masses look like. And the problem with them, or one reason that they can be very difficult to deal with, is, as you can see in this photo on the top right, they're very well camouflaged. And they can blend in pretty well to like some stone or rock or the bark of a tree. It makes them hard to detect. So there's about 30 to 50 eggs in a single clutch, and the female can lay up to 2 egg masses per season. The eggs themselves are these long connected things right here. And the female will cover them with this gray putty-like substance right here. Sometimes she misses them. So sometimes they'll be exposed, sometimes they'll be covered. But when they're covered with that putty, it kind of looks like wet mud at first, and then it dries and becomes much, much harder to detect. That's what you'd be looking for, generally, if you're trying to find an egg mass. Some more photos here from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture will show you what those egg masses look like, on different surfaces, kind of about the size of them as well. And you'll notice just from these pictures that they're on lots of different kinds of surfaces. They're on, the bark of a tree here, telephone pole here, and then on the left, this looks like the underside of a picnic table. And you've got like a rusted metal barrel, like a fire pit or something. So they're pretty indiscriminate when it comes to where they lay their eggs. There's some research that suggests they might prefer to lay them on kind of higher up in certain trees, or maybe they like Tree of Heaven as an egg site. But we found them in lots of different sorts. They're not super picky winces. And again, this can lead to kind of the way that they spread around. You can imagine if they're laying their egg masses like on, the bottom of a barrel like this, they could easily lay them on the underside of a vehicle or a train car, a packing crate full of fruit, or a wooden pallet that's used for shipping. We've even found them on things in people's property, such as light bulbs or the underside of the cushions on their lawn furniture, camping equipment that's been left outside, toys or lawnmowers. So they can lay them on a lot of different things, which means they could very easily get unintentionally moved around, shipped to new locations. If they're on the underside of a car, they could get driven somewhere. So this is a very easy way for this insect to be spread around. They're not the best flyers, they're plant hoppers. So they much more prefer to either hitchhike, as the adults will just like latch onto a vehicle or something, or their eggs will get moved around. This right here shows you the eggs kind of right as they're hatching. You can see the nymphs emerging from the different connected eggs, and these ones mostly did not get covered up by that substance the female leaves behind, but you can see it on the side of the telephone pole right here. This little side-by-side comparison, you can see the spotted lanternfly eggs on the left. And on the right is something that might be a bit more familiar to us residents of Massachusetts. That's the egg mass of the gypsy moth. So you can kind of already see the difference between the gypsy moth egg masses are kind of brown and fuzzy, almost like moss almost. And they sometimes have these little pinprick holes in them. That's from a parasitic wasp that will sometimes go after the eggs of the gypsy moth. The spotted lanternfly egg masses, again, are kind of more like gray mud. So you can tell them apart. So as I said, the egg masses are kind of the main way that the spotted lanternfly can spread around. Pretty much any flat surface is a good vector or a good place for those egg masses to be. And if they're on something that you're going to put into your car and drive away, or your camping equipment, or underside of a car, it can get moved. The adults will hitchhike. And another thing is, so Tree of Heaven, as I said, will grow readily in disturbed areas, including the side of highways. And if you have a major highway that goes from one state to the other, or one county to the other, from within a quarantine to outside of it, the spotted lanternfly can hop from one Tree of Heaven to the next along those roadways and those highways, and just has kind of a natural pathway to move along to somewhere else. This shows you the different, ways spotted lanternfly can be on the vehicles right here. The nymphs, the adults will swarm all over everything, and the government of Pennsylvania, where these were first found, is very aware of this. So they've got, advertisements and literature like they do here, encouraging people to check their vehicles. For signs of spotted lanternfly, if they're in one of the quarantined counties, check their belongings. Make sure that they are not accidentally moving the spotted lanternfly around. So awareness is definitely a big part of the campaign to get rid of spotted lanternfly. This larger map here shows the extent of the spread of spotted lanternfly. The blue counties are places where quarantines currently exist. So there's all those counties in Pennsylvania, the 26 different ones, but it is also spread to 8 different counties in New Jersey. You can see all these counties that border the Pennsylvania infestation, no surprise there. There's also 1 county in Delaware, 2 in Maryland that are infested, and then a couple in Virginia and West Virginia down there at the bottom. If you can see them on your screen, all of the purple dots there spread throughout the different states are places where spotted lanternfly has been found, but it has not been established, so there's no need for a quarantine. So it's much further than that kind of relatively small area of the quarantine. It's been found as far south as North Carolina. It's been found throughout lots of different parts of New York and Connecticut, and then you'll notice it has also been found in Boston. So we found 1 dead spotted lanternfly adult in Boston in late 2018. It was in a potted poinsettia plant that had been sent to a garden center or some other store that sells small potted flowers, and that potted flower had originated from a greenhouse in the quarantine in Pennsylvania. So this is a pretty good example of the very easy way in which this insect can spread and how it could end up here in Massachusetts. It could hitchhike up there, from maybe a college student who lives in the quarantine in Pennsylvania and then drives up to attend school in somewhere in Boston or Massachusetts. It could move in on something that gets sent to a garden center or something else that gets shipped up here. A lot of ways it could get up here. It is definitely viable this far north. It would just, the eggs might hatch a little bit later than they would further south in Pennsylvania. But the fact that we have found it here once means it could definitely become established. And you'll notice Massachusetts is within the range of suitable places for the spotted lanternfly to be established according to this map. The red parts of the map show a place where it's very, very suitable, and that includes the places where it already is right now: New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia. Parts of New York, Massachusetts also seem pretty suitable, and that range extends all the way into the Midwest, across a lot of places where food is grown. And then you'll notice parts of California are also highlighted as like very, very likely, or not likely, very suitable for development and establishment of spotted lanternfly. And in fact, the spotted lanternfly has already been found in California. In October of 2019, several dead spotted lanternfly were found in a plane that was bringing materials from the quarantine in Pennsylvania to California. It was a plane, I think an Amazon plane that was full of packages and stuff, and then the dead spotted lanternfly adults were found when the plane landed in Sacramento. So once again, very easy way in our interconnected world with our global economy and shipping materials in our planes that this insect can move around. So I've kind of given you a lot of very striking information and some shocking images about how this insect can spread and what it's done, which might lead you to ask, well, like, are people doing anything about it? Of course they are. There's a lot of different management strategies that are in place right now that people are trying to use to deal with the spotted lanternfly. Some of the main ones are egg scraping, things like tree banding, removal of host, different chemical treatments, traps, and there's some biocontrols being researched as well. So the egg scraping is illustrated here, pretty self-explanatory. It's someone would go around, if they found a spotted lanternfly egg mass, they'd like scrape it off the tree, and then they either stomp it, as some states like New Jersey encourage, or scrape it into a bottle of rubbing alcohol, which will kill the insects or kill the eggs. So that's one pretty easy and effective method people can do, and our department gives out these rigid plastic cards that people can use to scrape the eggs off trees. Tree banding, as the illustration shows here, is like what it says. You're using these bands of sticky tape to wrap around trees and trap the nymphs. Since the nymphs can't fly yet, they're crawling up the trees again. They're crawling up to get to the higher part of the tree where there is softer leaves and other parts where the nymphs can eat. They can't fly around the sticky traps and they get stuck to it. pretty simple and effective. Problem is, if there's a very heavy infestation, that tape has to get replaced very often. And there can be bycatch of larger animals, things that you're not trying to catch. Maybe other insects, could be birds or squirrels or other larger animals, which is something people obviously don't want. So there's some things that have been developed, like cages, wire cages that would be put around those, or mesh, so larger animals will get stuck on them. So a couple of different things that are being done with that. There is chemical treatments. There's been a lot of research into what sort of pesticides and chemical treatments are most effective to use against the different life stages, against the eggs, against the nymphs and adults. Whether a topical spray just in the bark or an injection into the soil and the root masses so the tree can take up those pesticides is most effective. Bark sprays are being used in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Virginia to fight the infestation. And studies have shown that there is a lot of success with the trunk injections, that pesticide going directly into the tree itself, which will harm the insect as it feeds upon the tree. Trap trees are like what the illustration here shows. What a trap tree is, what this method looks like is most but not all of the tree of heaven, again, the main host of this insect, would be removed from a property. And then the remaining trees of heaven would be treated with a systemic insecticide, probably some sort of injection. The spotted lanternfly are going to concentrate by swarming on the trees that are remaining, the trees of heaven that are remaining, and they're going to ingest that pesticide and ultimately die. And this photograph here kind of illustrates how effective that strategy is. You can see kind of that thick carpet of spotted lanternfly around the base of the tree. So this is proven to be a fairly good way to deal with an infestation. And some people who might be wondering about, what about methods that don't involve chemicals or other pesticides or other things that are done with that? And it's there are certainly biocontrols that have been researched. Natural predators that we have here, such as spiders or possibly birds or praying mantises, are not attacking spotted lanternfly in high enough numbers to really have an impact on its population. Indeed, the toxin in Tree of Heaven might make the spotted lanternfly unappealing to predators. We're not 100% sure about that yet, but it seems, in the same way that a monarch butterfly is going to ingest milkweed to become unpalatable, the same could be true of spotted lanternfly. Regardless, so there are several parasitoids of eggs and nymphs from the spotted lanternfly's native range in Asia that are being researched. Things that might parasitize the eggs, which would help dampen the population. There's a gypsy moth parasitoid that does sometimes target spotted lanternfly, so that's shown very small success and maybe not enough to rely on entirely, but it could be part of a suite of options that are used to combat spotted lanternfly. There's also two native fungi that could be used as control methods. And you can see what these two fungi, whose Latin name are Batcoa major and Beauveria bassiana, no real common names that I've been able to find, how effective they are at attacking that spotted lanternfly, kind of how it's coming out of the joints and the different body parts of the lanternfly. So spotted lanternfly may lack the defenses against this fungi that native insects would have, since they co-evolved with those fungi and they'd be used to dealing with them. Beauveria bassiana is already used in some parts of Pennsylvania agriculture, so that could be something that is kind of already established and would be relatively easy to use and deploy against spotted lanternfly. Again, this is all in the research stage. One thing with biocontrols is you need to make absolutely sure that before it's released into the wild, it's not going to have any negative or deleterious effects on native insects or native populations. It would be pretty bad if you released this parasitoid wasp and then found out that it was also killing off or parasitizing a native insect that you really wanted to keep around. So with biocontrols, you want to make sure it's only goes after the intended target. So I've talked a lot about the quarantines, and that can be an effective method to to preventing the spread of the insect. And that's kind of more about controlling people's behavior, because obviously the insect isn't going to obey a quarantine order put out by the state of Pennsylvania. They don't know what that means. But what it is it informs people about the spotted lanternfly, and it encourages them to comply with the rules of the quarantine or risk having a fine. So in the case of spotted lanternfly, it makes sure people are very aware of the insect and its eggs, and they're not moving them around. It discourages movement out of the quarantine counties of things such as firewood, brush, grapevines, different logs, yard waste, nursery stock, anything that the spotted lanternfly could use as a host material, anything it could lay its eggs on. And we have firewood here for the same reason that we have a Don't Move Firewood campaign up in New England and Massachusetts. It's very simply a vector for a lot of different insects, either wood-boring insects or, in this case, eggs being laid on the surface of the firewood. So if you're going camping, you definitely want to make sure you're getting your firewood there rather than shipping it from somewhere else. Same kind of idea as this is kind of the same concept as the Asian longhorned beetle quarantine in the Worcester area of Massachusetts. By putting up these quarantines with these rules and having this awareness, you're helping people mitigate behavior that could move around the insect. There's actually an online compliance training that businesses who work in the quarantine in Pennsylvania and New Jersey have to undergo to show that the owners of those businesses understand the risks of spotted lanternfly and how not to spread it around. A lot of people that work with agriculture, with wood, that kind of thing, have to undergo that sort of training. Outreach and awareness. So that would be things, advertising campaigns put out by different states' departments of agriculture or USDA, trainings like the ones you guys are right now. Anything that can help raise awareness, teach ordinary people how to check for these insects, make sure they're not spreading them unintentionally. With a lot of invasive insects, the first time we notice them is not from like a scientist or a government official. It's a concerned citizen who knows what to look for, or just finds an unfamiliar looking insect and looks up what it is and alerts the proper people. So this is definitely a very important part of the effort to fight spotted lanternfly, especially in Massachusetts, where again we don't have an established population yet. So the sooner that we can find one and quarantine it and eliminate it, the less damage it will do. We definitely want to avoid something as extensive as is in Pennsylvania with all those quarantine counties with the trees completely covered in lanternfly. So learning about this insect is definitely very, very important for us. Some states that have larger budgets, like New York, can afford things like drones where they can check out trucks and shipped materials for signs of the insect, make sure that they're not getting moved around. Some states have dogs that are trained to smell out these invasive insects. Not saying that we really have the money for, or here in Massachusetts, it's not really necessary at this point in time either, but there's a lot of different methods that are being used against these insects. So having gone through this webinar, you might ask yourself what you can do to stop the spread of spotted lanternfly. So the first thing, it's obviously to educate yourself. There's a lot of different webinars out there, a lot of different videos and reading material about spotted lanternfly, websites that have good information, pictures. Good place to start would be the extensions for different state universities like Penn State Extension, UMass Extension, University of Virginia Extension, and on and on. Make sure you know about it. Make sure your friends and your family know about it, so they all know what to look for with the spotted lanternfly. Spread awareness, through talking about presentations like this, materials such as the ID cards we have down there at the bottom. Our department has ID cards like that, and a lot of different websites have fact sheets or flyers that you can print off. So it helps spread awareness like that. Make sure you're not moving firewood and to campsites or around. Just get it where you're going to use it. And if you're going to go camping, especially if you're going camping anywhere near where there's spotted lanternfly, make sure you thoroughly check your vehicle, your camping materials. Make sure you're not moving the adults or the egg masses around at all. So always check for spotted lanternfly and its adults. And very important, know how to report any sightings, because it's one thing if you can find an insect and you think to yourself, well, I'm pretty sure that's a spotted lanternfly, but if you can't tell anyone about it, it doesn't do anyone a lot of good. So that's where we come in. So this website right here is what our reporting form looks like. The URL is down there at the bottom. It's massnrc.org/pests /SLF report, or just /SLF. If you Google like Massachusetts spotted lanternfly report, you'd be able to find it. So the nice thing about this online reporting form is you can upload photographs. So if you find a suspicious looking egg mass or an insect that looks kind of funny, something that you're like pretty sure is spotted lanternfly, take a picture, send it into our website, and we will be able to look at it and help you figure out what it is. We would rather you be cautious, and even if you're pretty sure it's not spotted lanternfly, but maybe you have a bit of a doubt, please send it in. We would rather tell you that it's nothing to worry about than have a spotted lanternfly sneak past us. So thank you very much for taking some time out of your evening to listen to this presentation, and I think we can open up the floor for questions now if anyone has them.
And so why don't we actually have folks chat their questions to us. I have one question. How did the plant get to Boston if it came from the quarantine area?
So my guess is that it was on a shipment of plants that just wasn't thoroughly checked, perhaps, or it might have been like an already dead adult that was hiding underneath the leaf or part of a plant, so it wasn't like sitting right out in plain sight. It might have been hidden, and then it wasn't found until it got to Boston. So I'm not 100% sure. That would be my guess, but like I said, it's a small insect. It's pretty easy for it to hide and hitchhike like that. And thank goodness it was just one and was already dead at the time.
And here's another question. What type of country of origin?
That's a good question. So I'm not sure of how much of an impact it's having in China and its native range. There are definitely some parasitoid wasps and other things there that can keep it under control, which is why we're researching what they have there in Asia. With a lot of invasive insects and plants, or not just plants, invasive species, they don't do as much damage in their native range
Right.
because there's something that keeps it under control. Either there's another animal or organism that can compete with them, so that they have to struggle to kind of survive. There might be predators to keep them in check. There might be something else or humans might have them more under control. But when it's introduced to a new environment, there's no predators that go after it. It can outcompete things. It can reproduce faster than other similar animals and plants. So these are all different factors. And my guess is that there's some native parasites and predators that can deal with them effectively in Asia.
Do you have materials to pass out or send to fellow gardeners? That's a good question. So where can folks get materials?
That's a really good question. So we do have you can order materials through our website, and we do have a Google form where you can fill out exactly what you want, and we'll send you those materials free of charge. We want to kind of spread as much information as possible. So what I can do is I can send the link to that order form to Ellen, and then she can send it to people or share it somehow. You can also just email me directly, and I can give you that information. Regardless, so there are ways that you can get those materials. We're somewhat limited on, or it's somewhat more difficult to do it now with us working from home. But if you are interested in having either ID cards or pest alerts for spotted lanternfly, or maybe some of the other invasive insects, we will find a way to get them to you.
So I'm putting joshua.bruckner@mass.gov in the chat for everyone. They can just email you directly, Josh, is that right?
Yes, they can email. If you email me directly, I will give you the link to the order form. And again, you just say how much of which materials you want, and then we will get them to you.
Can you catch us up briefly on the Asian longhorn beetle, Joshua?
I certainly can. So right now, so the Asian longhorn beetle, for those of you who don't know, it's been in the Worcester area since 2008 is when it was first discovered. We haven't had to expand the quarantine since late 2011. And we find fewer infested trees and fewer adults every year. We actually haven't found an adult in any of the traps since 2015. So we're definitely progressing in the right direction. You might have heard from earlier this year, there was a single infested tree found in Auburn, and that was the first tree we found in Auburn. It's the only one we've found there, actually. We haven't found any other infested trees in Auburn since then. So even though it's not eradicated, and it will take us some time to declare it eradicated, we've been moving in the right direction for some time. So things are looking okay there. Definitely still want to be cautious. Make sure you report anything you find. And right now we're getting a lot of reports of the native white-spotted pine sawyer, which is a harmless insect, looks a lot like Asian longhorn beetle, and it's active now. The Asian longhorn beetle itself will not emerge until next month, until about mid-July. And there's actually just on Monday, South Carolina confirmed that they have found Asian longhorn beetle in their state. So we don't know much about it beyond that. We don't know like how it got there or how far it spread, but it has been found in one new part of the country.
How advanced is the problem in Massachusetts, or how fast is it getting here?
Regarding spotted lanternfly,
Yes.
how advanced? So it hasn't been established here. We have only found a single dead insect in Boston in late 2018. So we know it can get here, and right now we're kind of on this like spreading information, try and put everyone on alert phase. So if it does become established here, we can catch it as soon as possible.
Someone wants to know, what is the cold tolerance of the spotted lanternfly? That's a very good question.
Yeah, very good question. So as I said, they survive only until the first hard frost. So once it gets to below freezing, the adults die off. So it wouldn't be able to survive if it's so far north that it's going to be very, very cold all the time, or they wouldn't be as successful. Kind of on the other side, if they get established very, very far south where it's much warmer all the time, they might be able to last longer into the year. So like I said, they can definitely survive in Massachusetts. They might just hatch a little bit later, a few weeks or so later in the year, depending on how quickly it gets warm enough for them.
So Josh, I just want to share this comment from one of the attendees. It says, really great job. I came in at knowledge equals 0, and now I am on the alert. I feel the same way. I really want to thank you. I want to thank the Newton Conservators, Green Newton, and the Newton Tree Conservancy sponsoring this program. And unless anyone has any last minute questions, I'll say thank you to all and end the meeting.
Thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Thanks so much.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. That was wonderful. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. You're welcome, everyone.
Be well.